The IQ Podcast. Discussion about cybersecurity, business intelligence, consulting, and DevOps. For the domain industry, by the domain industry.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Pinky Brand with IQ, and welcome to the IQ Podcast. Today, it is just incredible because this is a face-to-face meeting, and we're at Nordic Domain Days in Stockholm, Sweden, and it's my pleasure to actually meet Carel Bitter, who's head of data for Spamhaus, face-to-face. I don't know about you, but this is my first face-to-face meeting in 2 years.
I had another one just a month ago, but yeah, this is pretty good to be back and meeting other people who work in the same industry and trying to do the same thing. So I'm very excited about it. This really is. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's an intimate enough conference where, you know, it's not as large as some of the other ones. And it's kind of a nice way to kind of tiptoe, I think, back into the face-to-face meetings. And all that.
Yeah. This is very different from like, let's say an ICANN meeting or something where there's like 2,000 people. Here it's about 200 people, I've heard.
Yeah.
And that's to me, it's always sounded like the right size for a conference because you really get to have an opportunity to meet almost everyone.
Yeah, it's like a lot of quality time. That's kind of what I've noticed is, you know, I spend more quality time and deeper conversation with folks. And I know we had a chance last night to kind of chat a little bit at dinner, but thank you so much for taking your time now.
No problem. You're welcome.
We've done a podcast with you last year. Some of our listeners might be familiar. Over last year, we talked a little bit more about the basics of Spamhaus, you know, what you do, the Spamhaus block list and all that, and we can refer people back to that. If they'd like to learn more, but maybe you could just do a little bit of refresh on what's going on at Spamhaus.
Sure. Yeah. So the people mostly know us for, IP-based block lists, which we've been doing for over 20 years now. But besides that, we also have domain-based block lists. Then also people usually associate us with the email space, but we also do things that are way beyond email, that are more malware, botnet focused, more the DNS focused. So one great use case for a block list of domain names would be to use at the DNS level to say, hey, if somebody tries to visit a website that's bad, instead of having it to load through the DNS and you resolve it, you get the answer. At that point, you can use a block list of bad domain names to prevent people from visiting those bad websites, and that's something that is has nothing to do with email at all, but it is definitely a space that we are in, and we people don't usually think about as us being associated with that.
Yeah. And a full transparency, Spamhaus is one of our threat intelligence feeds that we use in the IQ Abuse Manager. So I did want to let people understand that. But with that said, I know that folks in the DNS industry, in the registry space and the registrar space, depend on information that's coming in through our systems and right from Spamhaus as well to learn about DNS related abuse, and what is suspected and reported out there. So are you seeing a level of action coming from those registries or registrars in terms of what's
So I mean, if you
reported?
Look at the whole topic of DNS abuse has really taken over the last couple of years, where there's I think it's all a logical turn of events where there clearly is more regulatory interest. There's clearly a lot going on.
Yeah.
Is enough being done? And this question is now not just being asked by professionals at conferences anymore, but it's risen up where, for example, the European Commission commissioned a study to investigate, what does the landscape look like, and so there's clearly a raise in interest from where at a more governmental level there is enough being done. What do things look like? How do we compare to someone else? How is our population, and can be a country, it could be the European Union, being protected compared to someone else? And I think that's really good. Obviously, there have been. I think one of the big game changers was the fact that a couple of years ago, the GDPR law came into effect, and that, as many people know, had a great effect on the availability and usefulness of what is usually referred to as who-is data for domain names.
Right. Yeah.
Who owns a domain name? And this is a tool that's being used by a lot of people who investigate bad things to say, okay, you know, who's behind this bad thing, or you know, is this domain name legitimate or not? And as that information becomes less available, a lot of people have said, look, this is not for the work that we do, trying to keep people safe online. This is not helping us.
Yeah.
And so, you know, where do you go? You go up the system, and I think that to me is really sort of a turning point. And since then, there has been more and more interest in, you know, how should this be regulated? Who should do what? What is sort of an expectation you can have where, you know, when does a registrar take action? When does a registry take action? What kind of measurements need to be met before somebody can say, look, okay, now I can terminate a domain name, or I can maybe even terminate a customer, or, you know, all sorts of things like that. So there's really a big change. In like the last ICANN meeting I went to in person, which was I think the 2019 October,
Probably 2019. Yeah.
Yeah, that the amount of talk there was about, you know, dealing with malicious registrations and abuse in general. I don't think I've ever heard that much talk at an ICANN meeting about that. And as somebody who deals with this kind of subject, it makes me very happy. I mean, what makes me less happy is how long it takes for you know, things to happen. But at least, you know, it starts with people talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's really good.
And there has been a lot more talk about it. And I think, wasn't it recently that a report came out that the amount of abuse was going down? I think was it an ICANN report that talked about that?
Yes.
Would you concur with something like that? Or,
it's hard to say, because things can change like week over week.
Yeah.
And in general, there's I think a lot of measurements that are being taken and that are being thought of, that will make these numbers go down. It's now finally being looked at. So if you look at in the financial world, the whole concept of know your customer has been around forever, and especially like ever since the 9/11 attacks. That is now a long time ago.
Yeah, 21 years.
There's been a lot of pressure on the financial system to know where is money coming from, who owns an account, who is sending what, where, and you can see that you know, that is slowly, more and more internet services are you know, making sure that, you know, okay, do we know who we are working with? And you can see that more and more domain registries are, you know, sort of looking at, hey, you know, we should really verify that, you know, this person who claims to be someone, or this business who claims to be someone, is really that. Because if you want to have trust in the system, trust usually is very closely aligned with identity and to knowing who somebody is, either a business or a person.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of shift going in that direction, and criminals usually don't like, you know, sharing their real identity for obvious reasons. And so that just makes it harder for people who have bad intentions and bad purposes to get domain names. And there's still a lot of bad things online that are being made possible by just sort of a sort of endless stream of available and cheaply available domain names being made available to people who do bad things. So the harder that gets, the more it hurts the business model, because a lot of the malware, phishing, scam, spam, fraud relies on the soon. So once somebody finds out that, okay, this domain is bad, it's going to be blocked in all sorts of ways. There's, you know, our data sets, there's things like Google Safe Browsing, there are all sorts of systems and programs and platforms out there that will say, okay, this is not a, you know, trustworthy domain, this is not a trustworthy website. And So the people who are behind the fraud, let's generalize it into fraud, will switch to a new domain name. And so the harder that gets, the harder it will be for them to escape that blocking or that mark of having a bad reputation.
Yeah.
And that for the people who actually care about having a good reputation, I think is only good news, because these are the people you're competing with. The same internet, and you need to stand out. And to me, it is kind of ridiculous that in many cases the bad actors get almost the same level of service as the good ones, and that's not great from a viewpoint of somebody who wants to do things right.
Right.
At the same point, it is not. To go back to, I mentioned stuff about GUIs. If people always think about verifying if something's bad, yeah, that's certainly one part of it. But how about verifying if something's good? How do I verify that? I don't know. PayPal.be, it really is PayPal Belgium.
Yeah.
And trust is really important, and it should be easy to verify identity, authentication, ownership. So I think that's that all drives these discussions about the whole abuse thing.
Yeah. It seems like it should be just seamless, from a user standpoint, because most users are very simple. They're not involved in sort of the inner workings of the internet, or they don't understand. They just know when they go somewhere that they want to be able to trust it.
Right.
And I just see that being, I see that an issue. I think what you're talking about in terms of, government intervention, or just in maybe perhaps forcing authentication of individuals and organizations that use the internet, in terms of identity, I mean, there's certain, as we know, there's certain CCTLDs out there where you can only register domain names, of certain top level domains where you can only register domains if you are an authenticated, organization or individual. But that doesn't play so well in other societies, in some societies where there may be an issue with, we're an organization that opposes the government, but we need the freedom to speak. We don't want to necessarily, balancing those things.
There's, I mean, there's always, for a lot of things where you can say, look, would be really good if we do that. You can always find an edge case where, this other thing would now be much harder, and we'll have to figure out solutions for that. But in general, I think bringing more trust to anything online is only good for people, because it's just too easy to be defrauded.
Yeah.
It's really, really too easy. And I mean, you're right. We cannot expect end users to do all sorts of technical things and jump through all these hoops to verify if, example.com really is Example Incorporated. But possibly people who provide services to such a website, such a domain name, the infrastructure providers, they can do the work for them.
Yeah.
And they certainly have the technical capabilities and know-how to say, okay, look, we can verify if these people really claim who they are. So
yeah,
there's that.
Just turning to some of the other trends that you're seeing right now. I know I just was reading the botnet report that you put out just I guess in the last few weeks or so.
Yeah.
And I guess we noticed like an uptrend, maybe I think it was 8% or something like that in botnet command and control. But I'm just wondering, first off, can you maybe explain to people who are listening? I mean, some folks will know what that means, but for those that don't, can you explain a little bit about botnet command?
Sure. Yeah. So when a device gets infected, it gets loaded with software that fetches instructions from somewhere, and that somewhere is usually referred to as a command and control point, or also known as C2. And this is where all the infected devices reach back to basically to the criminal, say, okay, what should I do? Should I don't know, send spam, protect a website, steal data, whatever the purpose of the botnet may be. And that can actually be multiple things at once. A lot of malware these days is very modular, and you install sort of a platform on whatever computer you can compromise, but you say, okay, I want only the computers in Germany to perform this particular action because I have a certain use for German computers. German computers, talking to a German bank sounds a lot more plausible to the bank than ones in the Philippines.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot better chance that if you want to log into a website of a German bank to try to steal money, if the computer comes from Germany, you know, you already pass probably one of the checks saying, okay,
That makes sense.
This
Yeah.
sounds plausible.
Yeah.
So we keep track of various malware families, and we try to figure out where these command and control nodes are. How are they being reached? What domain names are there involved? Who own these domain names? Who are the registries and registrars that provide the domain names? Who are the ISPs hosting the infrastructure? And we make a quarterly report out of that, saying, okay, this is where these people are. And I think it's important to mention that the fact that somebody, you know, some registry for a certain TLD has a bunch of these domains in their portfolio, or a registrar has some of these registered, doesn't mean that these people are malicious. Obviously, criminals can shop at the same shops that we shop at.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the difference is usually in, okay, you know, once people are alerted to the fact, now what do? And you will see that some people respond a little bit better and faster than others. But in general, the fact that somebody hosts one of these domains, or that they provide the servers that run the command and control node, doesn't mean that the providers are malicious or involved per se. They are probably just as abused as somebody else. It's just, if you want to use a cloud infrastructure provider to host your command and control node, yeah, I mean, there's a couple really big ones that you can choose from, and a lot of people choose the same ones. So,
Are you seeing any interesting developments as a result of the war in Russia, Ukraine?
I think it's a little bit too early to say, because it happened like right before the cutoff of the last report.
Yeah.
There's obviously a fairly large cyber component to the war. But I think that is a lot of the attacks that have been done are very targeted, and that's usually not sort of the botnet stuff that ends up on the average computer. This is way more targeted attacks that I mean, there have been a whole bunch of DDoS attacks on various Ukrainian government infrastructure, or other Ukrainian more public infrastructure, but that is not really kind of thing that we track.
Yeah.
I read about it. I know it has happened, but I'm sure there will be an uptick. I mean, probably one of the things that will change is that we've already seen that the Russian government has taken control of a regional Ukrainian provider upstream. So they used to have their own connection to the internet, and they've cut that off, and now it runs through Russian infrastructure. So I guess there will not be much anti-Russian activity on that network anymore. So but those are fairly small changes, and I'm not sure that will be reflected in what we see.
Any other trends or anything else you're observing out there?
Well, I mean, since we're at a domain conference,
Yeah.
I guess it's good to mention domains.
Yeah.
One of the things, and this is not a new trend per se. It's just something that it strikes me, again and again, and it seems to come in waves. I still see a lot of criminal domain usage, and it either being for spam or for malware hosting or for whatever, where people, instead of buying new domain names, and by now it's fairly common knowledge that anything that's new is at least suspicious.
Suspect.
It
Yeah.
starts out neutral, leaning towards suspicious, but
Right.
then the moment you see it in a certain context, you say, okay, yeah, now I certainly don't trust it. Just because the domain name is a day old, you don't expect it to do certain things, to be used for certain things. So we see there's a pretty large number of domain names that are existing registrations that are being sold by their previous owner on marketplaces that various registrars offer. And this is completely legitimate. But what you're doing, you're buying a domain that has a sort of existing reputation attached to it, depending on whatever it's been used for in the past. And that it might have existing traffic on website users. It might have an existing search engine ranking. It might have, it might be 10 years old. And as the opposite of, it's new, it's probably suspicious. The other side of that is it's very old, so it's probably good.
Yeah, it has no negative history.
So using domains like that, it will give somebody an advantage in certain scenarios.
Yeah.
So and the marketplace enabling that kind of behavior, there seem to be more and more of it, and it seems to be easier and easier to buy these secondhand domain names that have the existing, at least good-ish reputation to it, and they're now being used for bad things, and that is I think a noteworthy trend, and I think one of I'm not sure I don't really have a solution for that right now. It's something that I always notice that, say, hey, this is why do people doing bad things have domain names that are 15 to 20 years old? That's quite old on the internet.
Yeah, I talk to some operators sometimes, and they'll say, oh, we don't need to look at anything that's older than this. And, I've been saying, well, actually, you look at the data and you do some checking, you might be surprised. You've got some domains there that are 16 plus years old that being reported for malware, for example. And that could be just a compromised site or something. But I think when the domains are being dropped, and then, yes, I can see a bad actor going in there and going, okay, this domain, this seems like a good one. Let's grab this one or whatever. But I've got some ideas in my head, but some of them probably wouldn't be very popular. In terms of maybe how that could be at least, cushioned somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting that you bring that up, because I think, again, it's kind of a cat and mouse game. It seems that just the bad actors are trying different types of ways of using assets,
This is a direct reaction to the fact that you can buy from multiple places list of domains that are very new, which will allow you to mitigate some of the damage that people who buy endless new domains do.
Yeah.
So, okay, if now that this exists and now that it's common knowledge, I think it was McAfee that put out a report, was it maybe 2 years ago or something, where they said, they did a whole bunch of measurements and math, and they came to the conclusion that 37 days, I believe it was out of my head, was the time after which a new domain should be, somewhat trusted. So for the first 37 days, you should assume it's not good. And so, this just published on the blog that everyone in the world can read. Mm-hmm. So this is now it's not fairly common knowledge that the new is bad, or at least not great. And so, people respond to that. And marketplaces offer anything you can buy. So
Sure. Well, listen, thank you so much for your comments. This is a short conference, only 1 or 2 days long, so there's not a whole lot of time to go and see everybody, but there is plenty of, I guess you could say there's plenty of time to talk like we have today. And I'm glad we had a chance to sit down and
great to catch up.
And catch up. But thank you so much for your views. Really appreciate it very much. Thank you, listeners, for listening to the IQ podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast by going to our site, which is at podcast.iq.global. You can subscribe there, and that way you can listen to our podcast on wherever you get your podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Carel, for being here today.
All right.
Learn how you can spend less time fighting abuse. Start your free trial today at abusemanager.com. Do you have feedback or topic ideas? Reach out to us at hello@iq.global. And thanks for listening.